Hey guys, this week we are going to talk about mechanisms of evolution. So last week we talked about what evolution was. Now we're going to talk about how it happens. Like always, here is our objectives and vocab. For the objectives, you'll be able to explain how genetic drift, gene flow, mutations, and natural selection are going to cause species to either go extinct or become new species. It's going to cause some type of evolution to occur. And then there's your 10 vocab words. Remember that they go with last week's words too, because we're going to have probably a test on both of them. So now that we're going to talk about evolution and how it actually is going to happen, we have to talk about genetic equilibrium. So genetic equilibrium is when the allele frequency in a population remains the same. It's stable. It's not going to change any. And when we talk about allele frequency, let's remember the things like the cystic fibrosis or the sickle cell anemia labs, where we're looking at how much of the allele is in the gene pool. You have two definitions here, population and species, which are in your vocab, so you shouldn't recognize them, but I wanted to mention it here. A population is a group of interacting organisms of a single species. So one species, but it's the whole group of them, okay? And a species is a group of organisms that breed and produce fertile offspring. So it's not just that they can have sex, they have to be able to mate and then have fertile offspring. Okay? In this population that we're talking about, evolution is not happening. So everything is staying at equilibrium. So it's called genetic equilibrium. We're not actually changing any of the allele frequencies if we're in genetic equilibrium. So there are going to be 5 things that can disrupt that genetic equilibrium and cause pressure so evolution will occur. All right, that's what this lecture is going to be about. The first one is natural selection, which we talked about last week. Then we have gene flow, genetic drift, mutation, and non-random mating. Okay, so natural selection, NGGMN. Natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, mutation, non-random mating. 5 things. So natural selection first, we talked about this last week. We go into a little more detail here, okay? So with natural selection, let's remember that individuals best suited to their environment are going to survive and reproduce. So they're going to pass that beneficial gene on to their offspring, okay? This will increase the frequency of the beneficial allele in the population. So our beneficial allele will go up, our non-beneficial or our harmful alleles will go down, or just non-beneficial, I guess. Natural selection is going to select, right, or nature will select which organism is going to be successful. So this is very dependent on the environment they're found in. So in this picture we have here, right, you have all of these beetles, gray ones and white ones, right? And then if the white ones are eaten by a bird, because you can see them, in the next generation, we're going to have less white because these white ones didn't survive to reproduce, right? So we're going to have more gray and less white. It's not that the white allele is gone totally. It's just that it's decreasing because it's going to be masked by the black allele, right? Because in this example, it's the recessive. It's not always the recessive, but in this example, it is. So we're going to try to look more like our environment because the ones that don't look the environment get eaten. So natural selection on a single gene trait, this is how it actually happens. So evolution does not act on genes, it acts on the phenotype of the individuals, but that in turn changes the allele frequency. Okay, so we're going to change our allele frequency because your phenotype isn't helping you survive. All right, evolution is a change in the frequencies of the alleles in the population's gene pool. So we have our starting population. We have all of those bunnies, okay? If you took the time to count all those bunnies, which we did, it's going to be that your capital B allele, your dominant allele, has 12, right? It shows up 12 times. Your recessive allele shows up 28 times, okay? So we have 50% brown rabbits, 50% white rabbits. Then selection happens, and our white rabbits are eaten because they live in a brown place. Okay, now we have 12 capital B alleles and 18 lowercase b alleles. So we have 67% brown rabbits and 33% white rabbits. When I say brown and white, I'm talking phenotypes, right? When I say alleles, that's the genotypes, right? Okay, and then our white bunnies, so that was our new population. So then they reproduce, and in the next generation, we're going to have 16 capital B alleles and 24 lowercase b alleles. So our brown rabbits, we have 65% brown rabbits and 35% white rabbits. Okay, that's what they did when they reproduced. Look at how we started. We started at 50-50. Now we have more than 50-50 if you look at your browns. They're more than one row. Okay, so the allele frequency had to have changed because the phenotypes changed. And the phenotype is driven by the genotype. Natural selection also occurs on polygenic traits. So these are traits that have multiple genes, right, that influence a single trait. So there are going to be three ways that happens. One, directional selection. So this is when one extreme of the trait is favored. It looks like this. So you have your bell curve, right? Let me get my pen. Let me get my pen and see if I can make it right. Sometimes I change the slide when I do this. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So we have our bell curve, but we have whites down here on this one, and we have the darkest down the other side, where most of the people are going to be in the middle. That's like human height, right? Most people are average height, but you have both extremes. In this directional selection, these people over here are selected against, meaning the environment is darker, so the darker ones somehow fit in better. They have a reproductive advantage, right? So it slides the average over. So now our bell curve ends up kind of over here. Okay, so one trait, one extreme of the trait is favored more than the other. That's directional. It moves in a direction. Next, stabilizing selection. So stabilizing, when you stabilize something, you make it even. So here's our general bell curve again, same as before. On this one, that middle blue color would be more of an advantage. It would give you some kind of reproductive advantage. Both the end colors are selected against, and this color is selected for. Okay, so that means that's the one that gives you the advantage. The other two give you a disadvantage somehow. So our graph becomes thinner and taller right in the center because the average form is the better form to have. And then the last one is disruptive selection. Disruptive selection is when both extremes are better. Okay, so here's our graph, right? Both sides, this side is good and this side is good. So the middle goes down, right? And these two are selected against. This would be like if it had, like, I don't know, light trees in one area and dark rocks in another, right? The dark rocks, the dark butterflies could sit on the dark rocks. The light butterflies could sit on the light trees, but like those blue guys don't fit anywhere anymore, right? So the blue guys go down, the other two go up, right? And it diverges or it disrupts our population, and our population ends up splitting more. This one tends to lead to speciation in the long run. We'll talk about that later. So directional looks like this. I would draw this graph. Okay, so one end has a higher fitness curve than the other. The selection is against one of the extremes, and the range will shift. Okay, the graph could be on opposite ends. Second one, stabilizing selection. So we have one, right, the middle is selected for, the sides are selected against, right? I would draw this graph if you didn't draw those other ones, right? The individuals in the center have the highest fitness, selected against either ends, right? So both the ends go down. And then our last one, disruptive, is when we select against the middle. So both of the ends go up and the middle goes down. All right, draw that graph, last one. So the average phenotype is selected against and the others are better, okay? Next, after natural selection, is gene flow. Gene flow is when we move alleles into or out of a population. You know it as migration, okay? There are two kind of more detailed words to migration. You can have immigration. It starts with an I, and it's when alleles move in with an I. Or you have emigration, starts with an E. It's when alleles move out or exit, E-X-I-E, E-N-E, okay? Immigration in, emigration exit. The gene flow is going to introduce new alleles into the population, right? And that's going to change our allele frequency, right? When new alleles are introduced, that can cause evolution to happen, right? So we have them either coming in, immigration, or leaving, emigration. Next, genetic drift. Genetic drift is when there's changes in allele frequency because of something totally random. Okay? Could be like earthquake, fire, flood. If you're something tiny like ants, it could be a person coming by and stepping on half the colony. Okay? These changes are going to impact small populations even more than large populations, because if you have a population of 5, right, let's say we have like 5 bugs in a population and 3 of them get stepped on, you now only have 2 of the genes to last. All right, so more, so like I just said, the small populations are going to be more susceptible to genetic drift than big ones because you can lose alleles. All right, so these are random. Another thing sometimes that goes with genetic drift, or does go with genetic drift, is founder's effect. That would be like when you have a whole island of things and then part breaks off. If the part that breaks off only has, like, let's say we have an island of birds that can't fly, right? Part of the island breaks off. The part that breaks off only has, 10 birds on it, then it's not going to have all the alleles that are in the whole population. It's only going to have those 10. If those 10 then only mate with each other and become their own colony, that's genetic drift, and that's called founder's effect. All right, it's just different ways we change the allele frequency. Well, not we, but the allele frequency can change. Mutations, right? We've talked about these a lot. These are random changes in the DNA of an organism, right? They passed on if they happen in the sex cells. If they don't happen in the sex cells, then they're not going to be passed on. They can produce totally new alleles for the trait, and they increase the variation in a gene pool, right? Because it's something totally random and brand new, that's going to increase the variation in our gene pool. These can be beneficial, neutral, or harmful. So they can be a good thing. Lots of them are a bad thing, or they may not affect anything at all. We learned about that when we did protein synthesis. So the beneficial ones are going to be ones that help organisms survive, and they're the ones that are important for evolution, because if you have a random beneficial trait now, right, that gives you a reproductive advantage, it's then going to spread throughout the population, causing the frequency of the alleles to change for evolution to happen. Last, non-random mating. This is when individuals have a choice about who they mate with, so it's not random. They're picking it for some reason. So like humans have a type of person that they like, right? Or other organisms have a type of, like, animal, like birds have a type of bird they want, right? Peacocks choose other peacocks because of, like, their tail spread, or lions choose other lions because they're stronger, right? This is not random mating. This is choosing because of certain traits. It's also known as sexual selection, right? Because it happens to animals that reproduce sexually. That causes some traits to increase because they're desirable traits, like big horns on a deer, right? Those kind of things. So it causes those traits to become more and more extreme because those are the traits that we're looking for. All of these things, right, can cause species to evolve. So at times, different environments lead to different adaptations among organisms of the same species. So look at our picture. We have a whole bunch of snails, right? They came to this, like, crevice in the ground that they can't cross. They split, and now they split and might go into different environments. That then those environments can lead to different alleles being more beneficial. So the buildup of these differences in the allele frequencies can actually lead to a new species overall, if the species become so isolated that they no longer mate with each other. All right, so when the population accumulates or gets enough genetic changes that they can no longer breed, they are then considered a new species if they can't breed and have fertile offspring, right? That process is called speciation, and that's what we'll talk about more next week. All right, so make sure you got these notes down, and I will see you later.